Okay, so in our last session, the last mark that was made was about analytical and placement meditation, and we talked about analytical meditation. So in analytical meditation, as the name indicates, we have to perform analysis. So whatever is the subject upon which we choose to meditate, so let's say it's mind generation, we will be analyzing to find what is the nature of that thing, how many classifications, what is the aspect, what are the focal objects, and so on and so forth. And we say that in terms of the Lamrim topics, from the very beginning, the first topic, the proper way to rely on the teacher, all the way up to calm abiding, the main meditation that we do is analytical meditation. Okay, so that much about analytical meditation. And now we are ready to move on. The next thing is day 7. So obviously it has taken us more than 7 days to reach their day 7. But here we are. We begin now. So we had the incredible opportunity, which is a great fortune, to go through the 6 preliminary practices. And we did that in a proper way without hurrying through that subject. And I have to say this is something which is quite rare. Most people, most teachers, when they teach the Lamrim, due to time constriction, they just begin from the proper way to rely on the teacher and then continue from that onwards. Very often, in most of the cases, the 6 preliminary practices are not taught. There's a reference to them, like, oh, before you do the actual thing, you have to do the preliminaries, but there is no proper explanation. So Geshe was saying, actually you have to recognize what an incredible fortune and opportunity we had to go through the 6 preliminary practices in a leisurely manner, and it's very good to rejoice and be happy that we have done that. And now we're about to begin with the actual Lamrim meditation session subjects, beginning with the proper way to rely on the Guru. So it's very good when you reach such a milestone to make a prayer, a wishing prayer, saying, may everything now be well completed. May we complete all the subjects well. This is a very good practice to adopt. You know, if you finish something, rejoice that you have completed that much. And if you are starting with something, make a prayer that it will go smoothly and everything will be completed properly. So day 7, Kyabje Pabongka Rinpoche began quoting from the great Bodhisattva Shantideva. You can free yourself from the great river of suffering by relying on the boat of human rebirth. Such a boat will be hard to get again. O blind one, this time do not fall asleep. So what is Master Shantideva saying? He says, you have obtained this human rebirth. It's a rebirth that is endowed with all the freedoms and endowments. So it is very precious. And it says it's like a boat. And by relying on this particular type of precious human rebirth, you can free yourself from the great river or from the great ocean of suffering. So such a boat will be hard to gain again. The boat here refers to the precious human rebirth. So it will be very hard. It's a very special type of rebirth, very meaningful. On the basis of that type of rebirth, you can escape suffering, but it's something that is not going to be easy to find again in the future. And then it says, oh blind one, which also can be translated as confused one, this time do not fall asleep. So he says, this is not the time to fall asleep. It will be the greatest stupidity, the greatest loss, if you allow this opportunity, this type of rebirth, to just pass you by. Yeah. So having given the quotation from Master Shantideva, then Pabongka Rinpoche gives the explanation. You have gained the perfect rebirth, a human one. So the perfect rebirth is a human rebirth. And where it says you have gained, it means you have found, you have attained the perfect human rebirth, right? A human one. A birth that is like a boat to freedom from the great ocean of samsara. The sort of happiness that lasts only until your death It's nothing to get attached to. And if you do not achieve the one eternal hope for all your future rebirths, it will be difficult for you to find such a physical rebirth again. So it mentions here the eternal hope. So eternal hope here refers to the final achievement, or the outmost thing that you hope to achieve, and that is the precious state of Buddhahood. So if you do not achieve this, then for all your future rebirths, it will be difficult for you to find such a physical rebirth again. Very hard to find a precious human rebirth again. Another boat to free you from the great ocean of suffering. So you must fulfill your one eternal hope now. So it means you must now, in this life, try to achieve this ultimate goal that you have, which, as we say, is supreme enlightenment. So set your motivation by thinking, I will achieve full Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, my past mothers. I will therefore listen to this profound teaching on the three scopes of the Lamrim and then practice it properly. So it says in order to reach your destination, you must know how to do it. And you see that by setting, from the way that he's setting the motivation, what is understood is that by relying upon the three scopes of the Lamrim, by training on the three scopes of the Lamrim, gradually you will be able to reach that final destination. So it's included within the motivation. All right, so having said the motivation, then it says, here are the relevant headings. And then after discussing the headings already covered, Pabongka Rinpoche continued. So as you can see, Pabongka Rinpoche reviewed the headings, the outlines, but here they are omitted from the text. So how he continued. The fourth major heading, the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions, has two subheadings. Number one, the route of the path, devotion to the spiritual guide, and number two, the proper graduated training you should undertake after you have begun to rely on him. I will now discuss how to devote yourself to a spiritual guide. So, as you can see, now we have started with the main subject and the main meditation subjects, and in that it says there are two major subheadings. The first subheading is how to properly rely on the teacher, and then the second subheading that naturally follows from that is once you have devoted yourself to a teacher, once you have found a teacher and relied upon him, how you're going to gradually train. If we go into the actual words that are used here for the two subheadings, specifically subheading number one, it begins by saying the route of the path, devotion to the spiritual guide. So this word, the route that is used here, indicates that it is extremely important. If you don't get that part right, nothing will work in terms of your practice and your realizations of the Lamrim. There will be no realizations whatsoever if you do not rely upon the Guru. Just by reading a text, you will not progress. It doesn't matter how many Lamrim texts you might read, how many times you read them. If you're not relying upon a spiritual teacher, there will be no progress whatsoever. And this is why it is called the route. If that goes well, everything will go well. If you don't establish the route well, nothing will grow out of it. Now, the word for route in Tibetan can have two meanings. One is root, as we use it, like the root of the plant, but the other one is the first syllable for precious or important. So there's a dual meaning here. It is the root and it is also very important. Now, this fact that we're stressing the importance on properly relying on the Guru is not something which is exclusive for the Gelugpas. All the traditions stress that. So the Sakya, the Kagyu, the Nima, and before that also everyone in India, there is this very strong tradition and emphasis on relying on the Guru. Now, if you can properly rely on the Guru, as they say, the realizations will come. For us, it is something which is very difficult to achieve. Why? Because we are ordinary. And because we are very ordinary, what we do is we see faults in the Guru, we criticize the Guru, we see shortcomings, they don't do this right, they don't do that right. So due to this criticism that we have for the Guru, it's very difficult for us to establish the root properly and have realizations. Yes. Okay, then it continues by saying, okay, I will now discuss how to devote yourself to a spiritual guide. I could not cover the material of the preparatory rites 4 times over, but one must do this 4 times when teaching the main part of the Lamrim discourse, starting from the section on devoting to one spiritual guide. This includes a summary at the start of the next day's session. From now on, you should follow this tradition. Okay, so what is the meaning of that? Up to now, we have been doing preparatory or preliminary subjects, such as, for example, the 6 preliminary practices. There is this tradition that if the teacher is giving a commentary, then every subject has to be repeated 4 times. And in those 4 presentations, it has to be presented from a different angle, so different information, some additional information, and so forth. So Pabongka Rinpoche says, usually this is the rule. However, in terms of the preparatory rites, it is admissible if you do not do it 4 times. However, when you start with the actual subject matter, in our case here, starting with the way to rely on the teacher, from that point onward, you must definitely offer those 4 rounds of explanation. So this is what he's saying. From now on, I will offer these 4 rounds of explanation. And Geshe-la was saying, this is the case when a commentary is given. Here, Geshe says, I'm just trying to introduce you to the Lamrim, just to introduce you to those subjects. So Geshe says, from my side, I would find it difficult to offer explanation from 4 different angles or give you 4 different instructions on the same subject. Even doing this once can be quite demanding. So Geshe says, someone like myself would not be able to offer you 4 rounds of explanation on every subject. So understand that this is not an official commentary. It's just teachings that, hopefully you will get some introduction, some explanation, so you get an overview of the Lamrim. So it begins now with talking about the proper way to rely on the Guru. He says, you can see for yourselves that carpenters and sculptors, for example, who can learn by watching, must first study with a teacher. So he begins by giving these ordinary examples that we see in the world. So he says, look around you. Someone who is a carpenter or someone who is a sculptor, for someone to become a carpenter, to be able to make something out of wood, for someone to be able to make a statue of a deity and so forth, first of all, they must learn by watching. By watching here, it means they must look how someone who already has the knowledge is achieving that thing or shows them the technique. So they must study with a teacher. Otherwise, they cannot just all of a sudden pick up the tools and know how to do those things. So there is no need to tell you that you must rely on a spiritual guide in order to know properly the path that will fulfill your eternal hopes by taking you to the same level as the Buddha. So he says here, you want to reach a place where you have never been before. None of us has been there before, because up to now we have just been going around in samsara. But now you want to reach the state of Buddhahood. You want to achieve the ground of a Buddha. Who of us has ever been into a pure land? None of us has been there before. So it goes without saying. So it says there is no need to tell you that you must rely on a spiritual teacher. If you, in other words, he says you cannot do it without relying it. If you think that you can do it without relying on a teacher, you are gravely mistaken. So it says there's no need to tell you. You can see from that simple example of the carpenters and the sculptors, there's no need to tell you that you need to rely on a teacher in order to reach Buddhahood. Okay, so it continues by saying, some people think they can know the path by reading books and not have a guru, but this is not good enough. You must rely on a qualified guru. So there are a lot of people who think that, and a lot of people who say that. I don't need to rely on a guru. I don't need to rely on a guide. I can do it myself. But actually, this is not the case. You need to rely upon a guru, a spiritual teacher, and as it says here, it must be someone who is qualified. It continues by giving an example, and it says, suppose you were going to India, for example, you would definitely need to find a guide. And not just anyone would do. You must depend on someone who has been there before. So he says, suppose you're going to a place you have not been before. He's giving here the example of India. If you want to go there, you need to have a guide. And the guide cannot be just a general guide, because someone can come and says, oh, I'm a guide, right? That doesn't qualify them. If you want to go to India, you need to have a guide for India. If you want to go to Tibet, you need to have a guide for Tibet. So whatever is the specific location you want to reach, you need to have a guide that can take you there. So it's important here because it says you need to find a guide, where it says here, and not just anyone. You must depend on someone who has been there before. So the idea of the guide is someone who has familiarity with that particular location and the path or the road that leads you there. And in order to have that familiarity, it means that that person has already traveled there. That person has already reached this destination, and having reached there, they know what is the path there, so now they can lead you. Now that is a very important remark, because this remark actually indicates to the point that the guru is actually the Buddha. If he's going to lead you all the way to Buddhahood, it means he has been there. It means he's already a Buddha. So this is a very important point. So similarly, it says here, a spiritual guide must be a person capable of taking you to the path of Buddhahood. So here you want to obtain the state of Buddhahood, the ground of a Buddha. So the spiritual guide is someone who can lead you there. In other words, it must be someone who has already been there. That is a very important point. Now, some people might raise the doubt and say, hold on a minute, I don't need a guide to go to India. I can look at Google Maps and I can get there myself. Okay, you might say that, but actually you have to consider who drew those maps, right? Google itself, it's an app. Google does not draw maps. So someone who has local knowledge of all the little paths there has drawn the maps, and then they have uploaded them to Google. So someone with knowledge has made the map. So this is the most important point. You cannot go there unless you rely on a spiritual teacher, and if your spiritual teacher is capable to take you there, means he has already been there, means the teacher is a Buddha. So it says, if you depend on anyone at all, on bad company and the like, you will not be led to the right path and may go astray. So we say you have to rely on a guide, but you cannot just accept anyone as your guide, right? As we say, it has to be someone who is qualified, someone who has the full knowledge to take you there. Thus, it is vital to depend on a spiritual guide at the outset. So note here that the important thing is, if you want to reach the ground of Buddhahood, from the very beginning, you have to rely upon a teacher who knows how to lead you all the way to the ground of Buddhahood. If you rely on someone who does not have complete knowledge, even if you request them, even if you plead with them and say, please take me to the ground of Buddhahood, that person, even if they have every intention, actually, if they don't know the path, they will not be capable of leading you there. Therefore, from the beginning, it says you must make sure that you choose your spiritual guide and you choose someone who is capable of taking you all the way to the destination that you want to achieve. So, it says it is vital to depend on a spiritual guide at the outset. And note too that Jay Rinpoche's words, that the spiritual guide is the root of the path. So this is an extremely important point. And this is why Jay Rinpoche, when he wrote down the outlines, when he refers to the way to refer on the spiritual guide, there's always an additional phrase that says the root of the path. So it's a very important point. So it's a very important thing here, because as we say, there are a lot of people who have this idea that I don't need to rely on a teacher, I can actually do it myself. I can just read the book and all the information I need is there. Now, of course you can read the book, but it is very difficult to make any real progress in this way. First of all, this is not the Buddhist way of doing it. Secondly, it doesn't actually work this way. And thirdly, the most important thing is that you will not be receiving the uninterrupted lineage of unbroken blessing. So that is the most important thing. Now, in order to generate any realizations, whatever is the subject that you're doing, we know that we have to follow a process. First there is listening, then there is contemplation, then there is meditation. And the order of those things is definite, it is determined. It always begins with listening. So listening here, it means you rely on a teacher. You go and receive teachings, and you hear and you listen to what the teacher transmits to you. That is a very important point, because at that point of transmission, what they pass on to you is this uninterrupted lineage of blessing. So as we say, the blessings come gradually from one master to the next, to the next, to the next. And this is how they have reached your teacher. And now your teacher is passing this uninterrupted flow of blessings of all the previous lamas into you when you are listening. There is no one who is going to meditate first and then go and listen to the teachings afterwards, right? It doesn't work like this. So we go to the teacher and we listen to those teachings, because this is the way to receive their blessing. And exactly this is the reasons why we made the petitions. So we just finished the 6 preliminaries. The last one was to make the petition. And we say that the blessings will not come unless you make a petition. If the blessings were coming without having to make a petition, then fine, you could just open up the book and read the book, and you could just make your way through that. But in reality, it is very clear that there will be no blessings unless you make the petition. And it's very important for us to go and listen to the teachings that come directly from the teacher, because this is how we receive those blessings. Without these blessings of the uninterrupted continuum from all the previous lamas, there will be no realizations. You could read all the Lamrim texts that have been written. You can read them many times. What that will make you, it will make you a very knowledgeable person. You will come to get all this information, but you will not have realizations. So there's a difference between being knowledgeable and just having the information, and another thing completely to have the realization. And this is why we say we go to the teacher. The teacher is extremely kind to us because he's giving us commentaries, he's giving us transmissions, and he's giving us instructions. So, Geshe was saying, I know from my experience in Europe, I have visited Europe, a lot of people are very interested in meditation. However, they do not really rely on a proper spiritual guide. And because they don't rely on a proper spiritual guide, they don't make progress. So you hear people saying, you know, I meditated for 8 years, I have been meditating for 10 years, but I can't generate any realizations. So how do these people meditate? Well, they open up a book, they rely on a particular book, so they read what the book says, let's say on this particular chapter. So, and then they try to meditate exactly on what they have read from the book. And then after 8 or 10 years of practice, which is a very long time, they still say they have no realization. Why is it that they don't have realization? It's because they're not actually relying on a spiritual teacher. They have taken the book to be their guru, the book to be their teacher. But there is a very crucial point here. When you actually rely upon the teacher and receive the teachings of the teacher is communicating something very special to you. What the teacher is communicating is his or her personal experience. And that personal experience is not something which is documented or reflected in any text. So there is a very special interaction or between the teacher and the student. The teacher is communicating his own experience, and then the student, according to the degree of their intelligence or maturity and so forth, they might understand it, they might not understand it. So the teacher will explain it again and pass on a little bit of more extra information and so forth. Actually, in that personal communication, there is quite a lot of additional information. The teachers have quite a lot of experience that they can communicate, or points from experience that they can communicate to the students. And this is the thing that makes all the difference. So what you do is you go and listen to the teacher, they explain something to you, and then you come back with questions like, you know, is it really like this, or am I correct in thinking it is like this? And then the teacher again will explain it, give you some further clarification. Again, you go away, you think about it, you come back with more questions. Is it like this? And then the teacher will explain it again, and so forth. And finally, when you reach the point of clarity, where that subject is clarified in your mind, then you can do other type of meditation, like placement meditation, calm abiding, and so on and so forth, but not before. So remember, there is that important thing that when the teacher is teaching you, he's passing on his experience. And this is what leads to developing realizations. And the fact that we do not have realizations at present is because actually we don't know how to properly rely on the teacher. We have not relied properly on the teacher, and we have not received this communication of experience, you know, all the little details that make all the difference. Awesome. So actually, you know, you can see in many cases that we attend teachings, but it seems like we are not receiving anything. We are not receiving these instructions that come from experience. Why is it the case? The case is because there are many people these days that go around and they say they are teachers, but actually they have no experience, they have no realizations, they have never meditated on the particular thing that they are supposed to be teaching. So let's say there are, you know, actually there are quite a few people that go around and say, I will teach you calm abiding. I'm going to give teachings on calm abiding. They don't know. They have not meditated on calm abiding. They don't have the realization. They open up a book and they read, okay, this is the stages of developing concentration. And then what they do is they come to you and they teach you calm abiding, just pass on what they have just read in the book. But there is no experience, so they have nothing to pass on to the disciples. And as it is said, if you do not know that subject, you cannot teach it. You have nothing to teach. So this is the case with a lot of teachers. There are a lot of people out there who say, I will teach you this. Actually, there are a lot of people teaching calm abiding in this way. I will teach you calm abiding. But they have just opened the book and they're just reading or repeating what they read from the book. So that thing is very important, to receive that stream, that continuum of the blessing that comes from the previous masters, one master after the other, communicating and passing on their experience. If you're not receiving that, then whatever you're receiving actually is not going to benefit you. And basically it's a waste of time, isn't it? And there will be no realizations, no results from attending such teachings. So you can see here, it is a very important issue, that issue of relying upon a teacher. So all of this discussion we are having is to stress how important it is to actually rely on a fully qualified teacher. So we are talking here about the importance of relying upon a spiritual guide. And for us to engage any practice, it's very important to examine a few things. So we have to ask a few questions. So first of all, is this pure Dharma or not? We have to examine this practice. And by examining here, it means, and examine the purity, meaning we are examining the lineage. So the lineage, we should be able to trace it all the way back to Buddha Shakyamuni. Does it come from Buddha Shakyamuni or not? Because if it's not coming from Buddha Shakyamuni, it's best to leave it. You don't want to engage it. Just drop it. If you are going to do a practice, you should engage an authentic practice that comes from Buddha Shakyamuni and has this lineage that comes all the way down. So that is the first question. The second question, before you take this as your practice, is there anyone who relied upon this particular teaching, upon this particular practice, and became enlightened? Are there Mahasiddhas who reached the state of Buddhahood by relying on this practice or not? Because if they are not, why am I going to waste my time with this? If no one became enlightened by doing this particular practice, why am I going to engage it? It would be much better if I use my time and energy in worldly activities, to secure my food, my clothing, to clothes and so forth. Just get a salary, Why practice something that would bring me no spiritual results? So here we're talking about the Lamrim. Before you engage in this practice of the Lamrim, it's important to ask these questions. Actually, we know that there are a great number of practitioners who have reached enlightenment through relying on the Lamrim, number one. And number two, we know that these Lamrim teachings is traced back into the Buddha. So these texts that we have, the Lamrim texts, they are based on the commentaries, and the commentaries are based on the sutras, and those sutras were spoken by the Buddhas. So we know that we can trace it all the way down to the Buddha. So if a particular teaching or a particular practice actually fulfills these two requirements or passes these two texts, by all means engage it. Otherwise, we have to be very cautious. We have to be aware. There are many people who come around and say, oh, this is a very special practice. You should be doing this. Before we take anything as our practice, we should examine it. What is the lineage? Does it stem from Buddha Shakyamuni? And has anyone become enlightened by following this practice? So be very careful and examine whatever people are offering to you. So we have to be very cautious with these things. Okay, so then it continues. The way to devote yourself to a spiritual guide begins with 4 headings. Number 1, the advantages of relying on the spiritual guide. Number 2, the disadvantages of not relying on the spiritual guide or letting your devotion lapse. So you can see number 1 and number 2, they are opposites. So on one, you talk about the advantages or the benefits you have by relying on the spiritual guide. In the second one, you talk about the disadvantages, or in other words, the fault of not relying on the spiritual guide or relying upon him but then losing your faith, allowing your faith to, or your devotion to lapse. Then number 3 is devoting yourself through thought, and number 4 is devoting yourself through action, through deeds. Yes. Okay, so we begin with the first one, which is the advantages of relying. Only when you think beforehand about the advantages of relying on the spiritual guide and about the disadvantages of not relying on one, you will do so enthusiastically. So it is like this. Basically, you are comparing and you say, okay, if I do it, there's this advantage or this benefit. And on the other hand, if I don't do it, I'm going to miss out. There is this fault. There is this disadvantage. So once you understand the benefits of one and the disadvantages of the others, you will be very enthusiastic in engaging this practice. So it makes a difference in terms of your enthusiasm. The benefits of relying on a spiritual guide are discussed in the Swift Path, so from the Lamrim text, the Swift Path, in accordance with the oral tradition of our gurus, and this is treated under 8 subheadings. So as we say, there is this oral tradition of the gurus, so from the previous lamas, the previous gurus, the previous generations, every lama passes it on to the next, to the next, to the next. So according to this oral tradition, we can have 8 outlines or 8 subheadings in that. Okay, so we begin with the first one of those, which is you will come closer to Buddhahood. In my own Guru Dakpo Rinpoche's oral tradition, we subdivide this heading into 2. Number 1, you will come closer to Buddhahood by practicing the instructions he taught you. And number 2, you will also come closer to Buddhahood by making offerings to the Guru and serving him. It actually makes sense that you will come closer to Buddhahood if you rely on a spiritual teacher. Why? Because when you rely on a spiritual teacher, you actually honor and serve the teacher. And if you honor and serve the teacher, you're actually honoring all the Buddhas. And in this way, you're pleasing the Buddhas. Number 2, or the second reason, is that when you honor the teacher, you are amassing the best type of merit. Because it is said that from all the fields of merit, the teacher is the supreme field of merit. So honoring the teacher means you will accumulate the best quality and a massive quantity of merit. And we know that those who have a lot of merit will be very successful. So with a lot of merit that you create in this way, you will quickly reach the state of Buddhahood. So this is how we understand. If you honor and please the teacher, you please all the Buddhas and you get incredible merit. So of course you come closer to Buddhahood in this way. So there was this sentence here that says the highest tantras too achieve this extremely quickly, and the Guru Yoga is the very lifeblood of the Tantric path. So the very important thing here says the Guru Yoga. Now we can practice Guru Yoga in relation to different rituals. So, for example, you can recite Lama Chöpa, you can recite Lama Ganden Lagema, and so on and so forth. But this is not the meaning, the actual meaning, because whether you recite those texts or not, the important thing is your relationship with the Guru. Are you relying upon the Guru? Are you relating to the Guru in a proper way or not? Because it says you have to take that relationship with the Guru, this is the actual Guru Yoga, as being the lifeblood of the path. So pay attention here to the word life. Everyone considers their life, or their blood if you want, to be very precious, very important. So here the relationship with your Guru has to become extremely precious as your own life, even more precious than your own life. If you get that thing correctly, then everything will progress very smoothly and very quickly. So you can see in highest Yoga Tantra also, that is very much renowned for being the quick way to reach enlightenment, that speed comes from correctly devoting yourself to the Guru. And any progression on the path, the speed of that path again comes from or depends upon properly relying on the Guru. Get that thing right and things will go well. If you don't get that fundamental thing right, there's no progress. You should not have hope for results if you mess this up. So Geshe says, okay, we run out of time, so we will stop here. We have not made much progress on day 7 material. That's okay. It's important subject, so we elaborated a bit. Anyway, Geshe says, I hope the next session will go a bit faster. Okay, so we stop here and we make dedication prayers.